Hi, welcome to another episode of Boring Eastern Roman History. Would like to go ahead and talk about a Eastern Roman general from the 11th century, Gregory Pakourianos. He was also known as Gregory Pakourianos in his Georgian name. He was from the Baccaran family. We do not know his date of birth, but we do know that he died in 1086 in Belatoba, Bulgaria. Anna Komnene states he descended from a noble Armenian family and that he was of a tiny body but a mighty warrior. Matthew Edessa, an Armenian chronicler, notes he was of Georgian origin. So there's a big debate on people trying to identify where he exactly came from, not knowing his date of birth. So some are saying that he was Georgian, some saying he was Armenian, some are saying he was this hybrid Georgian Armenian mix. Even though he personally identified himself being Iberian, which is in the same region. There's a modern historian, Anina Garcion, proposed that the family Pakourian belonged to a mixed Armeno-Iberian Chalcedonian aristocracy around the borders of Take and Tau region. If this is true, as Anna and Nina state, we see no other noble family members mentioned except for Symbatios Pakourianos in 1080, who was married to Kael Basilkiana and received a dowry of 50 pounds of gold. These two had no children, and he had a rank of a Chiropalides and died young in around January of 1093. He had a brother, Sergios, who served as a magistros and a Prodrus. Both of these men served in the West, most likely from Gregory, being the Domestikos of the West, who had influence for their advancement, being good friends with Alexios I, the emperor. Going to Gregory's brother Apasios, or is known as Abbas, there is a seal showing him as a magistros, and he was very rich and loyal to his brother Gregory. Talks about he had to abandon properties around Antioch, but had a lot of real estate in Macedonia, which he willed to Gregory at his death. So Gregory moved his body to be buried at Gregory's death in 1086. This shows us how close these two men were. Interesting, their father died around 1050, even though he was not named. And their mother sold their properties to give a dowry to the sister, leaving the brothers destitute. So this tells us they were not very rich, or I believe to be of a noble family. I believe Alexios in 1081 elevated Pakourianos and made him and his name to become a noble military aristocratic family. We see Apasios died when Gregory was a duke in the east. At the time, he was the Duke of Theodosopolis. This could be around the early 1060s. There are a few more family members that are mentioned late 11th century and early 12th century. The name seems to fade away to obscurity. Pakourianos is quoted as saying he belonged to the glorious people of the Iberians. That was the quote. This is another reason when he built a monastery called the Monastery of the Mother of God, Petronisanista, in Bakova, Bulgaria, he insists the monks to know the Georgian language. He wrote the Typicon for them in October of 1083, and he signed his name in Armenian and Georgian letters. And his monks were Orthodox Iberians. So this kind of shows you, too, another example of proof that he must have been mixed of Georgian and Armenian. He never signed his name in Greek, nor wrote anything in the Greek language, so it's most likely he was not educated in Greek, but did know the Georgian and Armenian language. So what is also interesting about this Bakovia, Bulgaria monastery is that even to this day, it still holds the remains of both Gregory and his brother Apasios. There is no mention of wife or children, yet we have a grandson listed as Gregory Pakourianos the Younger, born around 1080 and died in April of 1105. Now, he was a military governor of Ohrid in the west, who held the rank of Sebastos. There are a few surviving letters between him and the Archbishop Theophylact of Ohrid, corresponding back and forth. And now we do know that this Gregory Pakourianos the Younger had a son named Nicephorus Pakourianos. Now let's dive into Pakourianos' ranks and his military bio. So nothing really is known about him with his military career until like 1064. So we do know the ranks he did hold was Domestikios of the West, Duke of Theodosiopolis, and Megas Domestikos, and a Sebastios rank. Now, the historian Caldelus mentions Pakourianos as a nobleman who disagreed with King Bagarat of Georgia on August 16, 1064, and the Romans left Armenia to the fate of the Turks. So, to dive into Ani in 1064, a large army under Alp Arslan attacks Ani, and after a siege of 25 days, they capture the city and slaughter the population. An account of the sack and massacre of Ani is given by a Turkish historian, Sabit ibn al-Jawazi. Now he writes, putting the Persian sword to work, they spared no one. One can see there the grief and calamity of every age of humankind, for children were ravished from the embraces of their mothers and mercifully hurled against rocks. While the mothers drenched them with tears and blood, the city became filled from one end to the other with bodies of the slain, and the bodies of the slain became a road. The army entered the city, massacred its inhabitants, pillaged and burned it, leaving in the ruins and taking prisoners. So they took some prisoners, all those who remained alive. The dead bodies were so many that they blocked the streets. One could not go anywhere without stepping over them. So this shows how bad the Turks were to the Armenians. Now, the Seljuk advance forced the Eastern Romans to basically evacuate the Eastern Anatolian fortress in the theme of Iberia. So in 1071, he held a position of strategos at the theme of Iberia. And Gregory ceded control over Kars and Tau to King George II of Georgia in 1074. But this had the adverse effect and did nothing to stop the Seljuks from advancing. So, 1081, Pakourianos leaves Adrianople and gathers nobles and men to meet with Alexios and deal with Guiscard of Dyrrhachium on October of 1081. He places Nicholas Branus as his hypostrategos, second in command of Adrianople. Now, at this battle, Pakourianos commands the left wing. It shows Pakourianos held his line and made some advancement into the Norman right wing. And then afterwards, when the battle was obviously lost and it was a victory for the Normans, we can definitely see that Pakourianos held his line and withdrew from the battle in order when it was clearly lost for them. In 1082, we see the Normans under Bohemond advancing to Larissa. Alexios left to gather more men and place Pakourianos in charge. So we see Pakourianos is watching and sees Bohemond had left Asperia, and Pakourianos goes to Moglina and takes over the fort there and kills the Count Sarachanos and destroys the Norman rebuilt fort. So Alexios returns and takes Castria, and it's successful against Bohemond. In 1083, we have Pakourianos establishes the Typicon of his monastery in Bakovia, Bulgaria. And then 1085, Alexios sends Pakourianos and Branus against the Mantians and Pechenegs. Now, a little bit before that, not much is written really in depth with his death and that Battle of Beltobia. I mean, we do have a little bit of it, but there's some holes in it. But there was, during the summer of 1083, the Pechenegs from Pastoron renewed their raids in the Balkans. And so Alexios entrusted this Gregory Pakourianos against them. Now, says that there was some success prior to 1086 in Beltobia with Pakourianos against the Pechenegs, but it's just very vague what was written about how he was just successful and they were beaten off. And then later they come in a larger mass, a larger force, and then I'll explain that in a minute. One thing I did fail to mention, there was a story that Anna had written in the Alexiad before Alexios became emperor in 1081. There was a meeting with Alexios and this Pakourianos that when Alexios was still the Domestikos of the West, he visited Pakourianos at Tesalis near the Thracian frontier and asked him for his oath if he would serve him. And basically, to sum it up, Alexios promised if he would serve him when he became emperor, he would take his place as Domestikos of the West. And we see this to be true. He kept his word, elevated Pakourianos to Domestikos of the West. It does show Pakourianos was instrumental in helping Alexios secure the West and help overthrow Botaniades, who was the emperor at the time. And I believe this was another reason why how he elevated him in his name for his loyalty. The two became very close. We just don't know at what capacity he really served, like Romanos Diogenes or Michael VIII Ducas, but there's nothing of real importance that was historically that survived or was written. But we do see some seals and titles only with Alexios, not with these other three emperors, or even if we consider the fourth one too, the Botaniades, which is kind of interesting. So to kind of go get to the Battle of Belotobia, we got to go and talk about this one interesting story that was also written in Alexiad by Anna. There was a Paulician or a Manichean, or you want to call him, named Trallos. Now, when Alexios promoted by Botaniades as Domestic of the West, he had taken with him a certain Manichean called Trallos and made him one of his family servants. Now, the man was considered worthy of holy baptism and was married to one of the empress's maids. So Alexios went so far to baptize him Orthodox. Now, Charles had 4 sisters, and when he found out they had been carried off to prison with others and deprived of all their possessions, he could not contain his indignation. So basically, they were all Paulicians, and they were getting persecuted, and they got arrested. So he sought a way to escape from his emperor's service. His wife had by now discovered his plan, and seeing he was about to run away, told the man who was in charge with supervision over the Manchians. So Charles knew what she had done and left with his confidence and went off to Belotobia. So they found a spot uninhabited and made a dwelling there. Every day they made sorties and were returned with much booty from far away as Philippopolis, but Charles was not satisfied with these achievements. Now he made a treaty with the Pechenegs off Peristrion and won the friendship of the chiefs in Glabanista and Drusta. He married the daughter of a Pecheneg chieftain. By every means, he strove to foster Pecheneg invasion to hurt the emperor. Day by day, the emperor was informed about him, and Alexios tried sending letters full of promises and even sent a crucible guaranteeing Charles amnesty and full liberty, but to no avail. So Charles, with his followers and some men with the same religious persuasion who had occupied the stronghold on the hilltop of Belotobia, continued to raid Roman-controlled areas. And Alexios sent his Domestikos, Pakourianos, to deal with the Manchians and Pechenegs. Anna describes the Manchians by nature are a bellicose people, always ravening like dogs for human blood. She calls them religious fanatics, and so Charles riles up the Pechenegs and leads up to the Battle of Belotobia. So one thing about this Trallos, it's kind of interesting is, we obviously know Alexios took a liking to him. He even went so forth to baptize him and serve in his household. And his wife was serving the Empress Irene. You wonder why didn't he take his case in front of the courts or even Alexios himself about his 4 sisters, which, drove this man to flee and to wreak havoc on the Romans. So I don't know if he did try that to no avail. There's no surviving documents or documentation about like his case being heard or what, just him reacting. So that was kind of interesting. So some sources are stating this Battle of Belotobia was like in 1085 during the summer, possibly 1086, because we do see Domestikios shortly arrive and avenge and to try to avenge the death of Pakourianos and Branas by gathering men dealing with the Pechenegs. So the Grand Domestikos, on the way to deal with the Pecheneg and Paulician raids, realizes there is a massive, large force than what he was than what he has under his personal command. So Pakourianos decides the best tactic would be a defensive maneuvering to avoid a pitched battle. Now Pakourianos is smart, and he has had experience with fielding an army, as we've seen in the past. And his second in command, Brana, sees that what he's doing and disagrees with Pakourianos' decision and wants to immediately attack the Pechenegs. So it gets to the point where Brannis is insinuating cowardice on Pakourianos, who then gives in and gives the order to battle with the sounding of trumpets and drums. We know Pakourianos commanded the center, and Brannis either commanded the left or the right wing, but we don't know who the third commander was, or if Brannis was on the left or right. Now, the pitched battle resulted in an immediate routing of the Imperial forces, and Brannis receiving a fatal wound in battle. Now, Pakourianos made several sorties, and per Anna, he rode with great violence into an oak tree and died instantly. So the army scattered all directions, and they suffered huge losses. And it talks about the loss of Pakourianos weighed very heavily on her father, who truly missed him. Now, this Nicholas Brannis was a hypostrategos and a proto-nobilissimos. Now, Brannis was a member of the highly distinguished Eastern Roman family who survives well into the 13th century. Now, Anna calls him a brave man with military experience, and he was passionate to run risks and too bold. And his boldness and being too aggressive does cost the life of himself as well as Pakourianos and an army. To sum it up, Pakourianos was a very capable general and highly respected, and had an untimely death. He was very smart, like his brother, and so basically these brothers were smart. They went around and they amassed so much real estate, and it's something like 93 pieces of real estate listed that Gregory owned. Now, some of it was inherited from the death of his brother, Passios, but still he was very wealthy. He did do a lot of charity and willed out many properties he owned in the East, but mainly what he amassed in the West, he gave to his family or the poor. And you'll see, like, if you guys go online and read about the Typicon, I'm not going to go into that, it's very long and lengthy. It was, you could see that Pakourianos was really, like, preparing himself after his military career. He was going to retire and become a monk. And he not only set up that Bakovia monastery, but he did another one in Iverson too, that prior to that with his brother. And he was even had in his will when he did die in this 1086 or 1085 that every year so many pieces of gold was going to be given out to the poor. The monks were going to receive an annual tribute of payment as well. And it's very impressive and something to see. At least I saw the pictures online about this Bakovia monastery where it still holds the remains. It's like you can see just really beautiful work of art from the 11th century that still stands to this day. So if you guys have any questions or any comments, please leave them. Thank you.